easier than the shepherd sling, and more powerful than the sling stick. This is the Baton Sling. At the time that I made the first sling stick video, the only source that I knew was this book by John Rowlands called Cache Lake Country. I've since discovered that there is another version of a sling stick that was published in Backwoodsman Magazine by an author named Smokey Williams, and he referred to it as the Baton Sling. Unlike the first sling stick, this one has a thin, springy action to it, and we'll see if that makes any real difference in the performance. So according to these very brief instructions, this project is going to require around 2 feet of a springy wood material. I'm going to use this hickory handle that isn't being used for anything. We will need some leather because in this version, the stone won't be held in a bowl at the end. It will be held in a leather pouch that we make specifically to hold the stone. And then of course we'll need a bit of cordage, maybe 2 feet of paracord, bank line, something like that. So the first order of business is going to be to take what we see on the drawing and attempt to scale it up to a pattern that we can apply to the piece of hickory. There are no measurements on the instructions. This is definitely more art than science. Based on my earlier sling stick project, I knew I wanted it to be around 2 feet long. So I'm attempting to eyeball what I see on the page and transfer it to the piece of hickory at roughly 2 feet in length. With some pencil lines down, I'm now trying to make those lines darker using Sharpie so that I'll have something to follow when I bring it over to cut it on the bandsaw. There we go. That's approximately what I'm aiming for, right there. All right, here's the piece roughed out on the bandsaw. I'm going to switch over to using an angle grinder with one of these abrasive flap discs with a really heavy grit, say 40 grit. And we'll see if I can't get this thing to look a bit more like the drawing. Baton Sling update about halfway. I still have a lot of material to remove. Make this whole part cylindrical, make the front of the handle flat, work out the asymmetries, just generally refine it. As you can see, what I'm doing is I'm using the 4-inch belt sander in a variety of ways to contour the various parts of the Baton Sling. In these areas where I've got a concave section, I'm using the rounded bit up at the top. To maintain straightness, I will use more of the surface area of the belt. To take off more material, I will use more of the edge of the belt. If you do that, just make sure you keep the piece moving, because any little pause while on the corner will cause it to dig in and create a divot. I still think this needs to be brought down. Okay, time for another check-in. It's starting to really get a bit more flexible. I don't know how flexible that needs to be, but I feel like more. Okay, I think that we're going to call this good. It matches the drawing fairly well. I'll try to put that up on the screen again for you so you can see what I was aiming for. Nice cone up here to attach the pocket. Shaft that is clearly flexible at this point. Comfortable handle, rounded in the back, flat on the front. Very light. A lot of wood has come off of this thing. So I am hopeful that this is all that needs to be done. Onward! Creating a pattern for the leather involves first making a cone out of paper that you attach to the top of the baton sling. And you can see that in the upper portion of the drawing. Next, we need to look at the dotted line and make that as a mirror image on either side of a center line that we draw on the cone of paper. And finally, we use some scissors to cut out the outline of the pattern. So here is the piece of paper, and it gets wrapped around the inverted cone at the top. And then this top bit gets folded over to form the part that holds the stone. And with that folded over, I feel like that's not quite encapsulating the stone enough. So I'm going to try making the sides a bit wider, or a bit taller right here, I should say, and the top part a bit longer. So using my first two patterns, I'm tracing out a third one that just makes some adjustments in the areas where I noticed it needed to be either wider or taller. It's just an iterative process, and eventually I'll hit on the pattern that works. As before, I'll just use some scissors to cut that pattern out so that I can evaluate it on the piece of wood to see if it's the appropriate shape. Okay, I've recut. This is the one my second attempt. Here's my third. Give this a shot by dry fitting it. So here's the paper cone. I make this cone come up a little bit higher, and that's good. And now when I fold the flap down, it comes down a little farther as well. I think I'm ready to try to cut this out of leather. So I simply traced around the piece of paper with a pencil to transfer that pattern to the leather and used a pair of scissors to cut it out. Here we go. Let's see how that fits. The bottom two pieces will be laced together very tightly onto the base. The stone goes here. And the top goes over like that. We're ready to try and strap that onto the stick. Add the string. I broke out the leather punch to do the 4 small holes for the lacing and 1 slightly larger hole at the top for the release cord. So we've got 4 holes punched at the bottom and a single hole punched at the top. In order to lace the leather onto the top of the baton sling, I've got this braided nylon cord. This is 1.5 millimeter in thickness. And then for the one that will go to the cover and be the release, this is 2 millimeter. Let's start with lacing the leather onto the top of the sling stick. I'm going to work with it off of the sling stick initially. So this will be wrapped around the top like so. I'm going to lace it from the top to bottom, something like a shoelace. You see the top string is running outside of the piece of leather, and then the cross pieces are inside, and this last one, which I'll tie, which will once again be outside. And we want to make sure that this opening is aligned with the flat portion of the handle. So I'm going to pull these nice and tight. I'm just going to do a bow temporarily. Oh yeah, it's very well on there, so I think that's strong enough to do some testing. I've just left this as a bow for the time being. Once I've done some testing and I'm pretty confident that things are working out, I'll switch that over to probably a square knot or something. And now we need to do this one, the release knot here. All right, for this top one, I'm going to use the slightly heavier gauge. Threaded that through once, and I'll probably just do a couple of half hitches. That's the 2mm cord, a couple of half hitches just to hold that to the top of the leather. And now I will cut this to some sort of length. I can cut it a little long. And at this point, my friends, I think we're ready to give this a try to see if it works at all. Okay, initial tests are quite promising. Just like with the original Sling Stick, the main trick is trying to figure out when the release point is. Once you figure that out, it's a fairly natural motion. The purpose of this divot here has become clear now. You're reaching around that narrow portion with your first finger and thumb in order to grab the release string. I think we could also benefit from a knot or maybe a bead right at this point where you're inclined to hold it. I'm going to stain the leather, maybe stain the cord to match, and maybe bring this shaft down just a little bit more. I'm just using a card scraper now to take down the high spots on this shaft, maybe make it a little bit thinner to see if we can get a bit more spring out of it. Finally, let's give it a light sanding. And it's off to the drill press to drill a single hole to hold a lanyard. Time to apply some dye to the leather and to the cord. And now let's put a little stain on the baton sling itself. That ought to do it. Now that both the baton and the piece of leather have had a chance to dry, I'm just going to coat both pieces in some finishing wax, some paste wax, just to give them something of a protective finish in case there's some moisture. Nothing crazy, just a thin coat of wax. Let's take care of the leather, same thing. Just wax that leather. With both the leather and the wood pieces finished, we're ready for the final assembly. We just need to make sure that the flat portion is lined up with the opening on the leather portion. Make sure this lacing is tight. Let's just do one more knot. I don't want that flying off. Okay. And there we have the completed baton sling. I like it. So the only change really has been the color, and I made this part a little bit thinner. It might affect the performance a little bit, but I think if it does, it'll be for the better. Time to test it out. I suppose I'm going to have to invest in a radar detector or whatever it is they use to measure the speed of arrows and baseballs. But just from a subjective point of view, I can tell I'm able to throw a lot faster with the baton sling than with the old sling stick. From a purely unscientific perspective, I'm going to rate the baton sling as superior to the sling stick. It could be that it's lighter. It could be that the spring action of this central part is contributing to the force. It could just be that I've had more practice, or a combination of all of them. but I notice a marked improvement in the speed of the throws with the Baton Sling. I still love the traditional Sling Stick, there's nothing wrong with it, but I do think this new Baton Sling version I've made outperforms it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. Leave a comment down below. If you're a potential sponsor, please hit me up. Until next time, I'm Doug North. Take care.